Donald Trump says a U.S. delegation will be heading to Pakistan Monday for talks with Iran as the ceasefire stands to expire on Wednesday. The U.S. president has also renewed his threats to destroy the country's power plants and infrastructure if no deal is reached. Tehran says it will continue to restrict ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz as long as the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports remain in place. Let's hear now from Iran's chief negotiator speaking earlier today.
Now look, some issues have reached conclusions and some have not. There have been other proposals, but we are still far from a final agreement. There are areas where we insist firmly, meaning these are not demands we are willing to compromise on.
Well, to discuss, we have our correspondent Fraser Jackson in Washington for us and our international affairs commentator Doug Herbert with me in the studio. Fraser, we'll start with you. So the U.S. delegation is heading to Islamabad once again, more or less with the same team. But what's different this time? I mean, talking to people there in Washington, can you say there's been a shift in strategy or will it be more of the same?
Not really, to be honest. I think more interestingly was the fact that we didn't know who was going to be leading this delegation when it was announced earlier today. There was a lot of confusion online as some were being told by a senior U.S. official that J.D. Vance would not be in those talks. And then even Donald Trump himself said that J.D. Vance would not be leading those talks, just like he did lead the first set. But then the White House went against that and said that J.D. Vance will be there. And when asked about the discrepancy, he said things change. So J.D. Vance now, we believe, will be going to Islamabad for a second round of talks. So read into that discrepancy what you will. But of course, this comes at a time when Donald Trump is still feeling the pressure from Iran. He spent the best part of the last week or so saying that the Iranians have agreed to pretty much everything that he's wanted. He said there was going to be a moratorium on refining, enriching uranium. They were going to be giving up their uranium stockpiles. That all now appears to not be the case. There does seem to be still some significant differences between what the American side want and what the Iranians are willing to do in this deal. So as it's understood at the moment, this deal will be still slowly going ahead, but this is looking more like a framework which is going to be agreed to by both sides, with an effective deal timeline pushed further down the road. So it's expected this ceasefire, which expires on the 21st, so just a few days from now, is going to be extended, and this diplomacy is going to continue behind the scenes until both sides come to a point where they are willing to agree to a deal. Donald Trump says that if that doesn't happen, that he's going to start the bombing campaign of Iran once again and is going to target those bridges and power plants, which of course is widely seen internationally as a war crime.
Yeah, and a lot hangs in the balance for Donald Trump, doesn't it? I mean, he posted earlier today on Truth Social, "No more Mr. Nice Guy." He's renewed threats as well that Washington will again strike Iranian power plants and infrastructure in the case of a no deal. So he'll surely be feeling the pressure, as you mentioned, to get oil and other trade flowing through the strait now.
Yeah, there was a really fascinating piece in the Wall Street Journal just about 24 hours or so ago, which gave a bit of a look behind the scenes, citing senior officials and those in Donald Trump's team, who said that the president has been secretly stewing behind the scenes and worried about the optics of this war, particularly kind of comparing it to the presidency of Jimmy Carter and the Iran crisis in 1979, which ultimately sank Carter's presidency and his re-election bid. Donald Trump worried about that. He fumed as well at the pilots that were shot down a couple of weeks ago, apparently shouting at his team for hours as well. He's also concerned about the price of petrol. It is continuing to go up here. Scott Bessent just today, the Treasury Secretary, said that it's likely that petrol will not go below $3 a gallon until 2027. And of course, remember that we have the midterm elections coming up in November. So if this is still ongoing, if this is still a problem by then it could seriously impact Republicans as well. So, Donald Trump's still very keenly aware of the optics of this, but still continuing in this war effort.
Fraser, thank you very much for now. We're turning to Doug Herbert, who is in the studio with me. Doug, so Iran has said that it's not yet decided to send a delegation, but if it does, what will be their posture going into this? I mean, they clearly believe they have the upper hand here.
That's exactly the word, because Iran has made it clear. No, it's no military match for the U.S. and Israel. Obviously, it can't match it firepower for firepower. However, it does feel that it has the upper hand in the sense that it has been able to call the shots, even with that very lopsided, disadvantage in terms of that military power. Look at the realities right now. The U.S. is headed back to diplomacy under a lot of pressure from Iran, which has continued to basically reassert its grip, if you will, over the Strait of Hormuz, and to do so right under the thumb of the U.S. blockade. Donald Trump may say that it's strange that that Iran is the one that says it's closing the strait, when in fact the U.S. is blockading it, implying that Iran doesn't have that power. But essentially it does, because by restricting or altogether not allowing ships to go through that strait, as the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, has said it will not do for any ships that are affiliated with the enemy, i.e. the U.S., Israel. And by being able to do that, it is in essence keeping what has been the big factor of uncertainty in this war. It has been keeping that uncertainty for the ability of traders, shippers, shipping container ships, cargo ships to pass through that Strait of Hormuz. It is calling the shots essentially. So when Iran says, and this is definitely the line across Iranian state media, when it says it has the upper hand, when it says that contrary to the message that Donald Trump's trying to put out, that he has devastated Iran's Navy and Air Force and is winning this war handily, and that Iran is essentially in a groveling posture, Iran's saying just the opposite right now. The Islamic theocracy has survived. In fact, you might even say it's been strengthened in a sense, that the hardliners and the clerical hardliners, with the naming of Khamenei's son as the supreme leader, they're perhaps in a revigorated, strengthened position than they were before the war. Iran is doing something it never was doing before. The Strait of Hormuz had been open before the war. Now it essentially, as I said, is turning that spigot on and off and calling the shots. Its leaders now are deciding whether or not they will even send a delegation right now. And Donald Trump very much needs someone to be sitting there across that table come tomorrow evening.
Indeed, he does. Doug, very interesting to hear your input, as always. Thank you.